Hey gang, Chonky here for the second part of our for the second part of our Liberties Crusade Abridged. Just a little recap of what happened last time. We met Michael Liberty, a journalist for the UNN, and as punishment for writing an article that brought a lot of light to suspicious members in the old families of the Confederacy, he was sentenced to do a military detail following the Alpha Squadron under Colonel Duke and do like puff piece articles and write like inspirational stuff about, our men on the battlefield fighting for us, keeping us free, that sort of thing. And at the end of chapter 2, Colonel Duke let him know that he was going to be getting the first scoop on alien species in the Caprulu sector, which at this point, aliens were not widely known, but behind the scenes, the Protoss and the Zerg are very well known by the Confederacy. They've just been keeping it all under wraps because they're evil. So, starting out chapter 3 is called the Sara System, and we are going to read the Liberty Manifesto. The first contact with another sentient race, and they blow up a planet. Hell of a calling card. Now, blowing up a planet is nothing new. Christ, we humans did it ourselves not too long ago. There was a revolt on the planet, Core Hall 4. The inhabitants didn't care much for the graft and corruption that was part and parcel of the Confederacy. They tried to rebel, and at first, the Confederacy tried a soft approach. They took out the rebellion's leaders with assassins, ghost troopers with personal cloaking devices. Unsurprisingly, this approach just made the people of Core Hall angrier and more rebellious, so the Confederacy took a harder line. We nuked Core Hall 4 from orbit. Apocalypse-class missiles, about 1,000 of them. Some green-tagged idiot on Tarsonis pressed a button, and 35 million people became nothing more than vapor, and their homes nothing more than a memory. Naturally, there were official justifications thereafter about the evil, menacing nature of Core Hall, and how they were planning to do it to us if they had even gotten the slightest chance. It was unfortunate that the proof of this accusation was located on a planet covered by blackened glass. I think that's what really scared the military about the vaporization of Chowsara, that there was something else out there that was just as crazy as we were, and they were better at it than we were. I like that. They mentioned how they tried assassinating the leaders of the rebellion, who was Arcturus Minx's father. And you know who killed Minx's dad? Kerrigan. Funny how she ended up working for him. So last when we saw Mike, he was just talking to Duke about how he was going to get to be the first journalist to publish a piece about real aliens, the Protoss to be specific. And so he's back in his room, going through the computer archives, looking up all he can on the Sara system, because, Chowsara has just been absolutely destroyed. And it's still a planet, but there's like nothing inhabiting it. And so he's looking up all the information he can on the two planets, because there's Chowsara and Marsara, and he wants to just, get all of his facts straight before he writes an article. But he goes over, it touches base a little bit on how the system was founded. It was a fringe colony, or a fringe system founded by a prospector before the Guild Wars, which was before the Confederacy even, really took hold. So this was a while ago that this system was founded. So Chowsara was the smaller of the two planets, and it actually had the larger colony of the two planets. And it was actually treated like a penal colony, which is like a prison type setup. And it says a lot of its inhabitants were still doing hard time. And Marsara, which is the planet that was not vaporized from orbit by a Protoss fleet, they had more of an eclectic mix of prospectors and soldiers. It's more of like an Old West type feel. A lot of dusty plains and a lot of rocks. Stuff like that. It's not really luscious. Also, it mentions that there's a bit of a religious sect in Marsara, like people that didn't agree with the Tarsonian limits of tolerance for other faiths. So, if you don't adhere yourself to the Confederacy's religion, you might find yourself on a fringe world like Marsara, where you can just be alone and practice what you want. As Mike is poring over reports from the UNN about Marsara and Chowsara, he does notice that there's a bit of a disruption of signals from the Sara system, but it looks like a lot of it is just about the latest Sons of Korhal outrage. I guess there was poison gas in a public plaza. Nothing too crazy, but and there was a multi-train pileup in one of the areas. But other than that, nothing about aliens or some invasion or anything like that. Lights in the sky, none of that. So now that he has some information on the Sara system, Mike begins composing a brief blurb. And this first one, he is writing more for the military, for the Confederacy, because he knows that they're going to pan through it and censor a lot of it anyway. So he summarizes his discussion with Duke and notes in the report that he's under full military restrictions and all reports moving forward will be under this detail. So he, he's fact-checking himself and making sure that everything's okay and that he's not, pushing too many buttons. And there's a little side section in here where he talks about how Handy Anderson, the sex move, would be absolutely giddy and dancing with joy just at the mere thought of Mike Liberty getting the first scoop on aliens. And then he has another thought where he thinks, if I'm lucky, he'll dance a little too close to that damned window of his. Because remember, Handy Anderson, the sex move, is acrophobic and is afraid of heights. And has a office really high up with a wonderful view of Tarsonis, which scares the ever-living shit out of him. Mike prepares a second report, and this one he scrambles under some cipher software and burns it onto a mini disc. And this one's for him. And this is the real report. The real nitty-gritty. Like, this is going to be... He says that this one wasn't going anywhere, but if something were to happen to them and their bodies were found, someone would know what was going on, and it was also a grim insurance policy. It was a smart move. Smart move. I wouldn't trust Colonel Duke at all. So as he's finishing up the second report and gets it scrambled and situated, he notices that a large shadow blocks the light of him working on the computer, and he looks up into the face of Lieutenant Swallow, who is now a full foot taller and several 100 pounds heavier because she is now decked out in her combat suit, her marine attire. She's now wearing the massive, bulky Pauldronitis armor with the visor that comes down. She's ready to go. She's ready to kill some people. He mentions that her visor is open, and she beamed with an excited smile on her face. She looked like a girl expecting her first prom dance, which is pretty funny because we know that Lieutenant Swallow killed at least 10 men and flayed the skin from their bones with a knife. So, you can just imagine her just like, I get to kill, and it's okay. Yeah, like she is raring to go, and she hasn't even shot up herself with stimpaks. So Mike and Lieutenant Swallow leave his room and they head towards the bridge, and he notices that the passageways before, where he thought that two Marines could walk side by side, are so tight in space that now they have just been converted to a one-way only hallway, and everything's lit up with arrows. So wherever you gotta go, you just follow the arrows, because if you start going the wrong way, Marines are gonna trample through you, because everybody's got a place to be. Stations need to be manned. It's go time. And seeing all these people walk by in combat suits begins to make Mike a little uneasy, and he sort of says to himself, oh, I've got to get me one of those suits. And Swallow's surprised because she says, I was unaware you were trained in the CMC-powered combat suit, which Mike wasn't officially trained, but he did read the manuals on it. He says that right here. He says, I've read the manuals, and then Swallow replies with, that knowledge would be barely sufficient for your own protection in a crisis situation, sir. However, should something happen, it is my personal responsibility to make sure you get to safety. And then he just kind of like half-heartedly responds with, oh, I'm just filled with confidence in Swallow's ability. So they make it to the bridge right as the ship goes through a trans-dimensional shutter and comes out of the subwarp. Now they were in front of Chowsara. And Mike notices that the bridge was now bathed in a red light, and then so it's like everything, red light's coming from the outside, and then all of the monitors are glowing green very Christmassy, which is perfect for this time of year. And at the main portion of the bridge, Colonel Duke is decked out in his own battle armor. Mike says he looks like a gorilla at the court of King Arthur, a gorilla with a pointy head, wearing plate mail. He was surrounded by a small cluster of view screens, each with a different talking head feeding data to him. So you just imagine everybody screaming at him about whatever's going on now that they're out of jump. So Swallow addresses the colonel and says that she's brought Mr. Liberty for him, and Mike gives him like a colonel and a little nod or a salute. And then Duke doesn't even look at him or acknowledge Swallow or Mike and just says, "We're nearing Chowsara." And Mike looks back between the windows and the monitors, and he thought that there was a mistake, as he didn't understand what he was looking at. And then he realizes that they were approaching Chowsara from the night side, and that the large disk of the outer Saren world was a messy rainbow smear of light, like that found on oily water. And so that's why he was confused, because it didn't look like, a normal planet. He had just looked at several UNN reports about the Sara system, and so he knows what Chowsara looks like. But no, this was the new Chowsara. It glowed with rippling bands of colors, moored at a handful of locations by bright spikes of orange. And so he's kind of just like dumbfounded. He's like, what did this? And then Duke responds, he says, "Oh, this is first contact, Liberty. First contact of the most extreme kind." And then he starts talking to his technicians. He's like, "How are the scans?" They're like, "Oh, there's no life on the planet. Most of the surface area has been liquefied and sterilized. And this zone looks to be about 20 to 50 feet deep. And all the settlements gone." The technician also continued that the orange spikes that they saw all over the planet appear to be magma breaches through the planetary mantle. So they've punched through the crust of Chowsara. And coincidentally, all of these punches through the crust are located at the locations of all the known settlements on Chowsara. Or not only did they vaporize the planet, they specifically vaporized all the people. Which, in hindsight, playing through the campaign of Starcraft, you realize that the Protoss were trying to stem the expansion of the Zerg. So knowing that the Zerg will want to consume all of the Terrans by not only wiping out all life on the planet, but making sure that they focus the densely populated areas. That's their way of stopping it, which, a lot of loss of life, but I guess it had its effectiveness, kinda. I don't know. The Zerg still spread, so I guess it wasn't that good. So the technician continues and says that about 80% of the atmosphere has been blown off of the planet, and that there's no orbital presence at all, because Duke asks if there's anything else orbiting the planet besides them, and the technician says, "Nope, nothing at all, negative." So since the technician didn't initially pick up any presence in the atmosphere, Duke has them widen their scans to see if they can just locate anything, fragments even of enemies or friends, anything at all, any signs of life. And as the technician is widening and scanning, Mike's just kind of sitting there in disbelief, saying, "Why would they do this?" But no one's answering him, because they're all working, they've all got jobs to do, and techs are running around in lighter weight combat suits and just kind of just pushing a lot of buttons, just a lot of buttons getting pressed, a lot of screens changing, a lot of heads on screens yelling at Colonel Duke. Mike has a moment where he just kind of thinks out loud and says, "What did this? Nukes?" And he says it with enough force in his voice, and it draws Duke's attention, it snaps him out of what's going on. And he looked at the reporter, he looks at Mike and says, "An atomic delivery systems leaving blackened glass and burning forests. Even Core Hall had some surviving pockets of clear terrain, for a while at least. Chowsara has been burned down to the liquid core in places. This is much more deadly than even Apocalypse-class bombs." And then he points at the screen and just says, "This is the work of an alien race, the Protoss. And from what I'm being told, they warped in from nowhere, closer to the planet than we would ever attempt. Huge ships, and a lot of them. They caught a few of the transports and scavenger ships and blew them out of the sky. Then they unleashed whatever it was on the planet and sterilized it like a 3-minute egg. Then they left again. Marsar is on the other side of the sun right now, and they're in a panic that they might be next." And so Mike is just that was a whole lot for Mike. He's just kind of taken back. He's like, "Protoss? What the?" He's like, "Protoss? What the hell?" And then, as he's still, reeling from all that info dump from Duke, Duke just says, "And you have enough for your report, Mr. Liberty. Get the hell out of here. We're going to remain on station in the event of other hostiles, but we're done here." And then as he's like trying to dismiss Mike, a tech like is like, sir. It's like, we have anomalous readings. And then, Duke is just like, what, where? What's going on? Location. And the technician gives him the coordinates. And they're like, it's heading right from Marsara, sir. And so Duke nodded, and he's like, "Prepare to intercept anomalous readings. Launch fighters when in range. It's go time." And then Mike is just kind of like still reeling from all the info before. He's like, "Are you crazy?" And Duke turns to him and says, "That's a rhetorical question, right? I hope so, son." And, Mike, still thinking with half of his brain, is like, "Yeah, but we're only one ship." And then Duke responds with, "Well, we're the only ship between them and Marsara. We will intercept," which is honestly like kind of a heroic action from Duke. Normally he's like I'm gonna wait until the fighting's over and clean up the pieces, or I'm gonna run these really shady installations. Like, so the fact that he's like, we're gonna like try and save this planet, even though he definitely knows about the Zerg and the Protoss and isn't telling us, it's a nice gesture by Duke, because he definitely does not care if people die. So as they get closer to intercepting the ship, the tech replies, or the tech opens up, approaching visual, putting on the main screen. And Mike states that it flickers, and it reveals a scattering of fireflies against the night sky. They looked almost pretty against the darkness. And then Mike realizes that the fleet is hundreds of ships, and that those were the main ships, and they all had their own smaller gnats dancing around them, which, we know as those are the carriers and the interceptors. But they also probably have motherships, which you don't see in Starcraft, and they most certainly have scouts and arbiters and all the good stuff, all the goodies. So Duke asks one of his techs if they're within launching range of the Wraiths, because remember, in the outer lore, battle cruisers are so massive that they can house Wraiths in them, and they would deploy them. They're 2 minutes away from being able to launch the Wraiths at this massive Protoss fleet. So while they're waiting to get close enough to launch the Wraiths, Mike just takes a deep breath and just kind of like really takes in the fleet. And he says even at long range, the Protoss ships had form and definition. The largest were huge cylindrical creations, similar in appearance to a luminous Zeppelin. So that's the carrier. And they're surrounded by hungry moths, which were the interceptors. And then Mike points out that there are other golden ships dancing between the larger carriers, glimmering like small stars. And then, as he's watching the fleet, one of the carriers just kind of dissolves. There's like a flash of light, a soft glowing, and then it's gone. Kind of like it phases out. And in hindsight, it's probably like Arbiter, like an Arbiter using the recall ability. Because, it kind of like comes in, the ability, and there's like a light in the middle of the recall, and they're like, whoop, and then they're pulled away. So at least that's how I interpret it. The fleet's getting recalled. But then everybody's just so surprised. The technician is like, "Oh my gosh, they're all disappearing." And Duke is just as confused, like, "Is it cloaking technology?" And then Mike is like, "At this scale? Come on, that's a huge fleet. They're all just gone?" And then the tech is like, "Oh, we're working on it. Negative. It appears they surrounded themselves with some sort of subwarp field, and they are retreating." Yeah, they're definitely retreating. So yeah, as they're watching, more and more ships just disappear one by one. Just Mike points out that the great carriers and their brood of smaller ships, the lesser golden vessels, all vanished like face spirits with the coming of dawn. Face spirits that can burn down a planet to its molten core. Those are powerful fays. And then, of course, Duke would take this approach. He allows himself a smile and says, "Good. They're afraid of us. Have all stations stand down, but remain alert for a trick." Like, yeah, of course they're afraid of the NORAD too. They've got like 100 carriers and 100 scouts, and yeah, they're afraid of the NORAD too, I'm sure. And so Mike, still being sensible and having half a brain, is like, "This makes no sense. They can wipe out a planet. Why the hell would they be afraid of us?" And so, with no info to back this up, Duke just says, "Well, it's obvious. They're spent. They don't have enough force to engage us." Where he got that information, I have no idea, but his ass is a bag of holding. He can pull whatever he wants out of it. And then Mike, retorts with, we're only one ship. There were dozens out there. He's like, oh, well, they're afraid that we'll get possible reinforcements. So Mike, still being smart, he's like, no, that's not what's going on. Like, we're not dealing with humans. Or, no, he's like, no, something's going on here. It doesn't make human sense. And Duke's like, well, duh. It's because they're not humans. Come on. Mike starts to, like, think about it a little bit more. And he's like, yeah, exactly. These Protoss have superior numbers and firepower. And we're facing them down? Why are they here? And then Duke is like, okay, Mr. Liberty, that's enough questions. Like, no more. Shut the hell up. And as Mike does, he keeps going. He's like, no, something's not jaking all this. Look at all the damage reports. They cooked an entire planet, but some places even deeper than others, every major human city. Yes, but look, there are strike zones on the other side of the planet, far away from any recorded human settlements. I know, I was just checking the archives, which we know is true. So, what else were they bombarding if it wasn't human settlements? Zerg hive clusters. That's what they were doing. They were wiping out the Zerg and the Terran. Because, Terrans can be a host for Zerg. And then Duke, still getting upset, tries to shut him down even more. I said that will be enough, mister. We have more to worry about with the Protoss than just how effective they are in choosing their targets. And then, almost like a light bulb, bing! Mike is like, and where did we get the name Protoss, Colonel? Is that ours or theirs? Like, you just gave it to me with no indication of, like, us coming up with it. It was just like the Protoss did it. It's like, we weren't even supposed to know about these things, and you guys already have them named? Like, what the hell's going on? And he said, and if it's their name for themselves, how come we know it? Didn't we have to know it in advance? Or did they send a warning before they attacked? And so now Mike is, like, really kind of, like, trying to press Duke. And instead of bothering talking to Mike anymore, Duke just commands Lieutenant Swallow. And she, yes, sir. And he's like, escort Mr. Liberty off the bridge now. And so it says right here that Mike gripped the railing firmly with both hands, and a ligatured arm wrapped in metal snaked around his waist, and Mike was shouting, damn it, Duke! You know more than you're telling! This stinks to high heaven! So I just imagine him just like, no! As, like, Swallow's trying to just, like, muscle him away, and just treating him like a little rag doll. And then, finally she wrenches his hands off the railing and carries him off the bridge. And it says right here, in the last paragraph, still shouting questions, Michael Liberty left to the bridge. The last thing he heard before the doors slid shut was Colonel Duke ordering the opening of a comm line with the Colonial Magistrate of Mars Sara. Which, if you guys don't remember, that's us. In the Starcraft campaign, in the Terran storyline, we are the Colonial Magistrate of Mars Sara in the first couple chapters. And so that right there, that sentence is the mission briefing for the first mission, where you have to travel out into the wastes and set up like a little encampment with the survivors. The scale in the game doesn't really reflect what is really happening, because all you have to do is find Raynor, find the buildings, mine some minerals, and recruit 10 Marines. And in actuality, what's happening is, because this is happening in multiple places around the planet, but you're taking like a couple hundred to a couple thousand refugees and taking them out of their homes and setting up like a camp with like a couple guard towers and pretty much just making like a little, little war settlement. So that's exactly what's happening right there. And that was chapter 3. So moving on to chapter 4, it's called Down on Mars Sara. And I'll read you the Liberty's Manifesto. This one's actually pretty small. There's a period in any war between the first blow and the second. It's a quiet moment, an almost tranquil time, when the realization of what has happened is just sinking in, and everyone feels they know what happens next. Some prepare to flee, some prepare to hit back, but no one moves. Not yet. It's a perfect moment. The time when the ball is at the highest point of the throw. The action has been taken, and for one frozen moment everything is moving, but everything is at rest. Then there are those jackasses who can't leave such things alone. and the ball starts downward again, and the second blow is thrown, and we plunge into the maelstrom. So starting chapter 4, it has been 2 days. Michael has been confined to his quarters for 2 days with either Lieutenant Swallow or one of her nearly resocialized comrades standing guard of his room to make sure he does not leave unattended, if he's allowed to leave at all. Yeah, so 2 days later, so now on Mars Sara, we know that we, the player, have set up our encampment, and we are getting, all the refugees to safety, and just abiding by the Confederacy's demands at this point, because we don't know what's happening, and now strange xenomorphs are popping up all over the planet, which we know at this time are now Zerg. Well, we know, they don't know, but I digress. So after 2 days, Mike is finally allowed to leave, and Lieutenant Swallow escorts him to a dropship, and they take a shuttle down to the beautiful Mars Sara. And it kind of jumps ahead, and immediately a day later, he's in a press pool with a bunch of other local reporters. So even though he got the first scoop, being confined to his room for 2 days, now he's just like everybody else. He's there with the local reporters, and they're all just waiting for answers from the powers that be. And of course, they're not getting any answers. The official debriefings were pellets, as it says right here, were pellets of non-news that stressed the suddenness of an attack on Chowsara. They don't know what happened, but it hailed Colonel Duke and the NORAD 2 crew as heroes for standing up to the enemy, and claimed that only the ever-vigilance of the Confederacy could protect Mars Sara. And then it says the Protoss, in parentheses, still no idea where that name came from, were portrayed as cowards who folded at the first sight of a real fight. The delicate, if impressive nature of their lightning-charged ships confirmed that notion. They fled because they were afraid to be hit. They're so fragile in their little glass cannons. When we know that's not the case at all. They're all decked out with plasma shields and high-powered weaponry, and they would rock the NORAD 2. But yeah, so that's the story, and all the Marines are sticking to it. Nobody is giving any leeway in what's actually happening. They're just kind of jerking all the journalists along, not telling them the truth. And Mike notes that in the outside of the press pool, on the rest of Mars Sara, a planetary lockdown was in force, and officially it's a civilian protection measure, but it was effectively a military overthrow of the local government, essentially ordering the magistrate what to do, and if he doesn't do it, then they will just replace him with somebody who listens. The locals were herded into concentration points for supposedly easier evacuation, but there was no mention of where the evacuation ships were coming from, when they were coming, if there was a timetable to abandon the planet, nothing. But in the meantime, there were Marine patrols on every corner, and citizens in general were just appearing very, very nervous at all of this, and I can't say I blame them. So it goes back to the press pool where all the journalists are just kind of playing cards and shooting the shit. They're speculating at things because they don't know what's going on. And there's this guy Mike Rourke, and he perks up while they're playing cards. He's like, "Man, I don't think there's any aliens at all. I think the Sons of Korhal finally found enough tech to avenge the nuking of their homeworld." And then some other person named Mags, bite your tongue, shut the hell up. Even joking about the core holes is enough to get you shot. Which I think it's funny that they have I don't know if I'd call it a nickname, but the Sons of Korhal, just calling them core holes. It sounds like a little insult. I'm gonna kick your ass, core hole. Mags replies, or keeps going, he's like, they're human, but not our type of human. They're from old Earth. I figure that while we were gone, they got so wrapped up in genetic purity and such that they're nothing but clones now, and they've come after us to clear out the rest of the race. So he thinks that humans from Earth have come to Caprilu Sector as the next evolutionary stage of man to kill them all. For some reason, because they sent all of criminals and just social exiles to the Caprilu Sector in the first place. So I just think it's funny that he's like, of course they would want to come kill us. They didn't want us in the first place. They can't let us live. And then Rourke, the other guy, he's like, oh yeah, I heard that about that. That's true. And Thaddeus from the Post thinks that they're robots and they have some kind of programming that prevents them from defending themselves. That's that's why they left when the NORAD tried to fight them. Which, where are they getting these stories? I think it's fantastic. Like, I don't know, robots that can nuke a planet but can't defend themselves. And then, of course, because you got to have one of these, especially on Marsara, another guy named Murray speaks up. He's like, "You're all wrong. They're angels, and Judgment Day has arrived." And then Rourke and Mags just kind of like, eh. And then they look at Mike, because Mike knows what's going on. So like, "What about you, Liberty? What do you think they are?" And his response is very cut and dry. "All I know is what I saw. And what I saw was that whatever they are, they liquefied the surface of the planet next door. And they could be here faster than the Confederacy could react. And we're here at Ground Zero, playing cards." And that just immediately kills the mood at the table. Like, everybody's playing cards, and then everybody just kind of like, oh. They just get really depressed and sad. And Rourke, pipes up. He's like, "You Tarsonis boys sure know how to squelch a good party. Are you in or out for the next deal?" But Mike's not paying attention. He stands up immediately. He sees a bunch of Marines enter the area, and some are decked out in combat armor, and some are in their regulation uniform. Mike's like, "Quick, Rourke, give me your press credentials, please." And Rourke just kind of like, grabs his tag. He's like, "No way, man." And Liberty's like, "Okay, well, what if I just trade you my press credentials for yours, please?" And he's like, "Well, why do you want to do that?" And he says, "Well, your local press, they'll let you out of the cordon and into the hinterland because they are really keeping tabs on Mike Liberty. Since he saw the Protoss, they don't really want him doing his job." So Rourke is like, "All right, fine," because like he doesn't really want to do any real reporting. This is his home. He just wants to be okay. So as he's like, "All right, fine, like we'll trade." Mike is like, "Oh, and give me your smokes too." Like, "Yeah, smokes." And Rourke is like, "What? Like, I thought you were quitting." And Mike's like, "Please, come on, go, come on." And he's like, "All right, fine." And so they trade stuff. Like they exchange credentials, and Rourke gives Mike his full pack of smokes. And then as he's like, you Tarsonis boys sure do like just take everything from people," the other guy, Max, is like, "Shut up, sit down, let's play some cards, come on." So now we cut away, and Mike is running over to meet with Lieutenant Swallow. And he's got Rourke's ID tag now, and he's got a fresh pack of smokes. Life's looking up for Mike Liberty. And he runs up to Swallow, and he's like, "Oh, Lieutenant." And she's like, "Ah, Mr. Liberty, it is good to see you again." And she has like this creepy warm smile that Mike knows is just part of her neural programming. But she wasn't in her combat armor anymore. She was in her regulation khakis, like Jake from State Farm. And so she's not on duty, so she's just hanging out. But she still had her small slug thrower on her hip and a nasty-looking combat knife on the other side. And Mike, pulls out a cigarette, and he's like, "Hey, you want to smoke? Let's She's like, "Oh, I thought you were quitting." And Mike's like, "I thought you were too," and then lights a smoke for her. And he doesn't light it, but like he gives her the smoke, and she pulls out a lighter, because both of these two are bad at quitting smoking. And then as she takes like a long drag, she's like, "Mike, I'm sorry for how I treated you on the ship." And Mike's like, "It's okay, I get it. Like, my job is asking tough questions, and it's duty. The bruises have healed. Are you busy by any chance?" She's like, "No, not right now. What's up?" And he says, "Oh, I need a lift and a driver for out of the hinterland." And he's just trying to be like all nonchalant, like, "Oh yeah, I just want to go for a ride." Silly things. And like Swallow gets a little confused. She's like, "They're letting you out of the cordon? Nothing personal, sir, but I thought the colonel was going to personally kick your backside to Tarsonis after that incident on the bridge." And, Mike not letting her know that he has Rourke's ID badge now and can go anywhere on the planet, presumably. He's like, time wounds, all heals. I almost read that backwards. Time wounds, all heals. They're lengthening my chain a bit. Just a bit of background stuff, talking about potential refugees. And then she corrects him. "Evacuees, sir. They're not refugees, okay?" He's like, "My point exactly. We have to get a line on the brave people of Marsara in the face of the threat from space. Are you interested in shuttling me around? And she says, well, I am off duty. I can't see the harm. Like, are you sure Duke won't mind? And then Mike is like, yes, I won. If he isn't, then we'll get back at the first checkpoint and I'll introduce you to my card-playing buddies at the cafe. It'll be fine. Like, it'll be a piece of cake. So Swallow gets a transport, and which is an open-topped, wide-bodied Jeep. You know, military-type stuff. And they swiped Rourke's ID tag, and it lets him out of the base, because it's not Liberty's, which is definitely not allowed out. And the authorities didn't seem to be worried about people getting in or out as long as their IDs scan. Like, they don't even, like, question him or anything. And as they're leaving the little encampment that they're in, Mike makes a comment on the surroundings. He says that Mars Sara had always been only borderline habitable in comparison to its formerly rich jungles of its sister, Chowsara, which is now destroyed, essentially. Its sky was a dusty orange, and most of its soil varied between hard-baked mud and stringy scrub. He mentions that irrigation had made parts of the desert bloom, but it was just more like, you know, shrubberies and stuff like that. Like, not a lot of life was on this planet. And he even notes that such crops like this, like just watering the desert, like getting irrigation out there, requires constant attention. And the fact that they're evacuating all of these evacuees, not refugees, was deadly for the planet, because they're essentially putting it back into another drought, which is just going to ruin all the hard work they've been putting in. But then he notes that the abandonment of the agricultural areas was a sure sign that the Confederates expected the Protoss to return. If it's going to get vaporized, what's the point, right? So after traveling for a bit, they come across their first concentration point for evacuees. And it's a fabric city, which is just like, you know, a whole row of tents erected in one of the fields, and there's a single Goliath walker overseeing the entire complex, which is not a lot of a military presence, because I'm sure that they're more threatening in like book lore, but in the game a Goliath is only so strong. And as they park the Jeep, Mike goes to get out, and he's like, let me talk to the evacuees alone. And Swallow doesn't like that. She's like, sir, I'm responsible for your safety. I can't let you do that. He's like, well, just watch from a distance. People aren't going to open up to me well if one of the Confederacy's own is standing there in full kit. And while Swallow's sitting there like a little confused, like thinking about it, Mike's like, and of course, anything I get is going to go through your people anyway. So you guys get to, you know, read all of what they're going to say regardless. And she's like, okay, that's fine. So she hangs back a little bit by the Jeep and lets Mike go out and talk to all these evacuees. The evacuee station was only a few days old, but the facilities were already stressed. It looks like it had appeared to be built to supply maybe 100 families, and it says that it currently housed 500. So amenities are in short supply. And Mike looks around and sees that trash is beginning to pile up along the fringe of the campsite, that people were still in shock, and those that are getting over the shock have realized that they've taken a lot of sentimental, unneeded items during the evacuation. So now all of these like precious sentimental belongings are just being abandoned or traded away for food and blankets. It's a rough time. So as Mike is talking to these evacuees, pretty much all the blame is being placed on the Confederacy. Like they're the only ones around. They're the only ones with a visible presence. They have literally a Goliath watching over them. The Protoss were just a rumor, and then there's just slight whispers of other things, the Zerg, that are out there. So people are mostly just hating the Confederacy, and for good reason. They even mentioned that the local magistrate, us, has also become a refugee in this whole endeavor. Instead of having like a nice, government office, the magistrate is now just another refugee at another camp, and nobody is allowed to stand up to the Confederates. Despite all the complaints and the bluff talk, there was a noticeable and definite fear, and that was fear of the Confederate forces. And the fact that we are no longer alone. Like, they know now that there could be Protoss, even though, like I said, they're just a rumor. But the fact that the Marsarans have to depend on the Confederacy, who they hate, or suffer the wrath of a mysterious alien menace, everybody's just scared shitless. It's not a good time. And aside from the rumor of the Protoss, you know, there's the sudden knowledge of the Protoss was followed by a wave of mysterious sightings. Lights were reported in the sky and strange-looking creatures on the ground. cattle were found slain and mutilated. Sounds like the Zerg. Add that to the blanket admission that the Confederacy was definitely herding the populace out of certain areas, as if they knew something that they weren't telling people. Now, they don't really talk about it, but I think the reason why the Confederacy is herding all of the people into these camps is because they saw on Chowsara that the Protoss targeted all the major settlements and, you know, vaporized it to dust. And so this is their attempt to try and save lives, when in reality they're just offering these Terrans up to the Zerg on a platter, because now there's nothing to defend them. And after about 2 hours and the last of Rourke's cigarettes, Mike headed back to the Jeep, because he had now spoken to everybody there, and Lieutenant Swallow was still there, standing alert next to the driver's side of the Jeep, ready to go. And as Mikey gets there, he's like, all right, like, we can leave, like, I have all I need. Swallow's just like standing there, and he's like, Lieutenant Swallow? She's like, sir, I've been watching something curious. May I share it with you? And he's like, yeah, what's that? You see that woman over there? The red-haired one in the dark outfit. And so Mike, like, looks around, and he sees a woman, young, dressed in what looks like night camo pants. She's got a dark shirt, a multi-pocketed vest, and she had brilliant red hair that was bound in a ponytail at the nape of her neck. And she looked kind of military, but not from any unit that Mike had ever seen. Definitely not Confederate. So he thinks that maybe she could be a marshal, but he hadn't seen any sort of local law enforcement in his journeys out here, so he didn't know what. And so it's like they're just both looking at her, and it's like, yeah, I see her. And Swallow says, she's very suspicious, sir. It's like, well, what has she been doing that's suspicious? Same thing you've been doing. Talking to people. Talking to people is suspicious. Yeah. Well, that's definitely suspicious. Shall we go talk to her? Like, right as he says that, the red-haired woman rose from talking with an elderly man and started walking over to another part of the compound. And Swallow just immediately just goes for her, and Mike follows behind. And then as they get close, Mike notices something else about her that's a little suspicious, is that she looks really clean. She doesn't look dusty like the rest of the refugees, and she doesn't look worried. So Swallow immediately just opens up with, excuse me, ma'am. And the red-haired woman hesitates in mid-stride and looks around, can I help you? And her jade green eyes narrowed just a hair, and Mike noticed that her lips were just a tad too wide for her face. Interesting observation. And so Swallow starts to, like, try and interrogate her right away. She opens up with, we have a few questions for you. And then she kind of like still just kind of like sitting there just unamused. She's like, and who would be asking these questions? And Mike, like, he steps in there. He's like, actually, I'm a reporter for the UNN. My name is Michael. And then she cuts him off. Liberty. Ah, yeah, I've seen your reports. They get things right more often than not. And Mike's like, oh, whew. And he nods. He's like, yeah, they're always right when I finish them. If something went wrong, I blame it on my editors. And so, like, the woman kind of stares Mike down, you know, sizes him up a bit. Her eyes turned into cold blades that could carve deep into his soul. And she says, I'm Sarah Kerrigan. It specifically says that she's specifically addressing Mike. She is completely ignoring Lieutenant Swallow. Which doesn't stop Swallow from talking to her, because she's like, and where are you from, Miss Sarah Kerrigan? And Mike notices that she's still smiling, but Mike can see a bit of tension in, like, her cheeks. Like, there's a bit of tension in the smile, like she's starting to go a little cuckoo, because she's on edge, and, you know, she's a killer. Kerrigan responds, oh, the University of Chowsara. I'm part of a sociological team stationed here when the attack came. And, you know, obviously in disbelief, Swallow's like, well, that's a pretty convenient origin, considering that no one can check on it right now. How about that? And Mike just kind of, like, interjects, and he's like, I'm sorry about her. I'm sorry about your planet and what happened. And then he realizes that for the first time he's, like, actually kind of, like, depressed. Because before he was just like, oh, shit, Chowsara got destroyed. That sucks. What happened? Aliens? Oh, my gosh. He hadn't actually thought about all the people that died, like, really thought about it. And now talking with somebody who's apparently from a university there, he was like, oh, my heart goes out to you. And then she, and Kerrigan, like, goes back to Mike. She's like, I know. I can feel your sorrow. And then Swallow immediately, because she's interrogating Kerrigan. Then what are you doing here, Miss Kerrigan? And Kerrigan just, like, it's like, what the hell's your deal? Same as everyone else here, Corporal. Ma'am, it's Lieutenant. And you address her correctly. And Kerrigan smiles a little bit. She's like, yeah, sorry. Lieutenant, then. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. Trying to find out if there's really a plan for evacuation, or if the Confeds are running a huge human shell game. And then Swallow's, like, offended. She's like, what do you mean by that? But Mike was already, like, trying to reword it to be friendly. He's like, do you feel there's a problem with the current evacuations, Kerrigan? And Kerrigan laughs. She snorts, actually. She's like, isn't it obvious? You've got bands of people shunted out of the cities and into the hinterlands. And then Swallow's like, yeah, well, the cities are not defensible. Which Kerrigan was like, well, yeah, but the wilderness is? Like, look around. We have a single freaking Goliath here. It seems the Confederacy has mistaken activity for progress. They're content to move the refugees around like checkers on the board without any real plans to evacuate. But Mike is like, yeah, but I mean, I believe such plans are in the works, to my understanding, like the evacuation. And then, Kerrigan's like, yeah, I've read the official reports too, and we both know how much truth there is to them. No, the Confederacy of Man is just chasing its tail right now, moving people around in the hopes that they'll be ready. Ready for what? Says Mike. Ready for when the next attack comes, Kerrigan said. And then Swallow's like, ma'am, I must tell you that the Confederacy is doing as much as humanly possible to aid the people of Marsara. And then, Kerrigan does not buy that for a second. She cuts her off. She's like, they're doing as much as humanly possible to protect themselves, soldier. The Confederacy has never given a damn beyond the limits of their own bureaucracy. It particularly has never given a damn about its people. And most of all, it's never given a damn about anyone not on Tarsonis. Swallow begins again. She's like, ma'am, I must inform you. And, like, you can see that she's like, Mike sees that her smile is so brittle. And she's, like, talking through her teeth. Ma'am, I can assure you. And Kerrigan cuts her off again, saying, I must inform you that the Confederacy's history damns it as surely as its current actions do. It's willing to write off the Sara system, just like it wrote off the colonies in the Guild Wars, and Korhal itself. And then, once again, Swallow tries. She's like, ma'am, I must warn you that we're in a military zone, and dangerous talk will be dealt with swiftly. And while she's saying this, Mike notices that her hand is drifting to the grip of her slug thrower. And then she's like, no, and Kerrigan replies, no, Lieutenant. I must warn you. The Confederacy is leading you to the slaughter, and you won't realize it until the knives come out. And immediately, like, that's almost like the trigger. And Mike notices that a bunch of color goes back into Swallow's face, and she just immediately threatens her and says, don't make me do something you'll regret, ma'am. Kerrigan also replies with her own bit of anger. It says that she hisses, I'm not making you do anything. It's the bastards in the Confederacy that make people do things. They reach inside you and twist you apart until you're their plaything. So the question is, are you going to follow the programming they gave you or not? And then this is like about to be a full-blown cat fight. And so Mike like steps back and he's like, okay. He looks around, looking to see if there's anybody that can help, and he notices that everybody else is doing their own thing. Nobody knows what the hell's going on between these two ladies. And then finally, after like a stare down for what seems like minutes, Swallow like calms down and she takes her hand off of her gun. She relaxes. And then once she's calmed down a bit, Swallow calmly says, I must assure you, ma'am, that you are in error. The Confederacy is only thinking of its people. Then Kerrigan, just kind of like disillusioned, like, she knows what's going on. We know who Kerrigan is. She goes, if you must assure me, then you must. Will there be anything else, or am I free to engage in an illusion of freedom? And then, she's dismissed. Swallow says, no, ma'am, you can go. Sorry to have disturbed you. And, she's like, oh, it's nothing, whatever. And then she turns to Mike and she says, in answer to your next question, you'll find some answers at Anthem Base. It's about 3 clicks west of here, but don't go alone. And then she, like, looks at Lieutenant Swallow a little bit. And then she was gone. She disappears quickly. She strides across the compound and just disappears into a group of regulars. She's gone like the wind. And then now that she's gone, Swallow immediately is like, that woman was under some serious stress. And then as she's saying that, she reaches for a stim pack and just like puts it in the back of her neck and shoots up. And Mike's like, crazy bitch. Yeah, of course. Yeah. She's under stress. And as like the stim pack is hitting Lieutenant Swallow, she continues. She's like, it's not surprising for people to blame their rescuers for their problems. And this was not the time or place for an incident. Oh, and then she calms down. And Mike's like, yeah, no place at all for an incident. And then Lieutenant Swallow like looks at him sternly, and she's like, and it would best not be reported. You're not going to tell anyone. And Mike, he's kind of frozen a little bit, and he knows that Swallow used to kill men as a hobby. And he's like, of course, yeah, mum's the word, I'm not telling anybody. Your secret's safe with me, duh. And so then Swallow, now that she's like, the stim is in her system and she's coming back to reality, she's like, we need to leave now. And Mike's like, yep, okay, I'm down. Because he wants to get the hell out of there. No conflict for him, please. But as they're making their way back to the Jeep, he keeps thinking about Kerrigan, and he has thoughts of thoughts of her and what they were just talking about. And he's like, he just wants to know more about her, especially about how she knew what his next question was. We know that she's a ghost and she can read minds, but he doesn't. And he wanted to ask about the xenomorph sightings. That was his next question. So the fact that Kerrigan knew this and told him exactly where to go, which was Anthem Base, has just got him incredibly curious and very riled up. And as he's like thinking about going and checking out this base and catching up to Lieutenant Swallow, who's already getting in the Jeep, the last sentence in the chapter is that he resolved never to get into a card game with Sarah Kerrigan. And we know that that's because she would win. No problem. And that's chapter 4. So, thank you so much for watching, guys. Watch for part 3 coming up soon. And if you enjoyed the content, please give me a like and subscribe. It really means a lot, helping the channel move forward. And I'll see you next time.